Hey everyone, thanks for coming back. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
I parked my Jeep outside the gate because my father waved me off before I even cut the engine. He didn't say hello. He just pointed like I was a delivery driver who'd missed the memo. The Oceanside mansion in Connecticut looked exactly like it did in the magazines my mother loved. White stone glass everywhere, lights warm enough to sell the idea of happiness to anyone driving by. Valets in black suits lined up sports cars like toys on a shelf. My Jeep dust still clinging to the tires from a base 2 time zones away didn't belong in the picture. Apparently neither did I. I stepped out anyway. No uniform, no medals. Just a black blazer plain dress, hair pulled back tight because habits die hard. I'd flown in that morning from Eastern Europe, slept 3 hours, and driven straight here because my sister was getting engaged. Family obligation. The kind you don't argue with even when your gut tells you not to bother. Inside the party was already loud. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone laughed too hard near the piano. I recognized faces from fundraiser photos, bankers, donors, people who called my parents Richard and Diane, with that practiced warmth that meant nothing. I caught a few glances my way. Curious, appraising, then dismissive. My sister Sloane found me before I could find a drink. She was impossible to miss. Designer gown hair styled within an inch of its life smile, sharp enough to cut glass. She looked me up and down like she was pricing furniture. "Well," she said loud enough for the people nearest us to hear, "you actually came." "I said I would," I replied. She laughed and took a sip of champagne. "Still playing soldier, I see. Must be exhausting crawling around in mud with people who can't spell their own names." A few people chuckled. Not because it was funny, because laughing was easier than thinking. I let it pass. I'd learned that silence made people uncomfortable. That was usually enough. My mother appeared at Sloane's side, her hand already on my arm like she was guiding traffic. "Cassidy, sweetheart, your car." "Could you move it a bit farther down? The valet says it breaks the line." "The line," I repeated. "It's just temporary," she said quickly. "You understand?" I did. I always did. I nodded and slipped my arm free. No scene, no raised voice. I'd survived worse rooms than this. As I walked deeper into the house, the smell hit me first. Old wood, polished leather, the faint metallic note of oil that never really leaves a place where history is stored instead of lived in. My grandfather's collection room sat off the main hall, hidden behind a door most guests never noticed. That's where I was headed. Arthur Miller had been a 4-star general. To the public, he was a legend. To me, he was the man who taught me how to clean a rifle before I learned long division. He believed in order and consequences, and in leaving things better than you found them. He also believed that family was earned, not inherited. The room lights were on, but no one was inside. The displays were spotless, medals framed, swords mounted, photos labeled in neat script. Everything exactly as he'd left it. Almost everything. I stopped in front of the velvet-lined case near the back wall. It was open, not broken, not forced, just open like someone had been there and felt entitled to take what they wanted. The indentation in the fabric was unmistakable. Oval, deep. I knew that shape better than my own reflection. The Omega was gone. It wasn't just a watch. It was a limited 1969 piece he'd worn during his final command. He never took it off. When he died, he didn't put it in the written will. He gave it to me himself months earlier, pressed into my palm, with a look that said more than words ever could. He told me some things shouldn't be argued over in courtrooms. I stood there longer than I meant to. The noise from the party faded into something distant and hollow. My chest didn't tighten, my hands didn't shake. That came later. In the moment, everything went very clear. Footsteps clicked behind me. "Sloane again," she said, following my gaze. "You noticed. Where is it?" I asked. She shrugged. "Relax, it's just a thing." I turned to face her. "That thing didn't belong to you." Her smile didn't move. Neither did half the stuff in this house, if we're being honest. Grandpa had terrible judgment toward the end. I heard myself breathe, slow, controlled, the way you do when you're deciding whether a situation is a threat. Around us, the party rolled on. A waiter passed by the open door, glanced in, and kept moving. No one else cared. That was the strangest part. The room was full of people celebrating love and legacy while a piece of both had just vanished. Sloane leaned closer. "Don't make this weird. Tonight is about me." That was when it hit me, not like anger, more like recognition. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. I left the room without another word, not because I was done, but because I wasn't ready to speak yet. I needed information, not an argument. Arguments were loud. Information was useful. In the hallway, I caught my reflection in a mirror between two abstract paintings my parents pretended to understand. I looked tired, older than my years, and completely invisible. Have you ever walked into a room knowing you could outthink, outwork, and outlast everyone there and still be treated like background noise because you didn't fit the image they wanted on display? I went back into the crowd. My father was holding court near the fireplace talking about Sloane's fiancé like he'd personally arranged the sun to rise that morning. Grant Sterling, senator's son, clean suit, soft hands, the kind of man who smiled without using his eyes. He saw me watching and gave a polite nod, nothing more. We'd met once. That had been enough for him. My mother caught my eye and motioned me over. "Cassidy, darling, don't disappear. People are asking about you." I doubted that, but I stepped closer anyway. "Tell them I'm happy for Sloane," I said. She smiled, relieved. "See, that's all we need. No drama, no drama." The phrase landed heavier than she meant it to. I glanced back toward the hallway that led to my grandfather's room. The door was still open, the empty case still visible if you knew where to look. A missing piece in a perfect display. The party music swelled, glasses raised. Laughter echoed off marble and glass. Everything looked intact from the outside. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone there, solid and familiar. I didn't take it out, not yet. I stayed where I was, listening, watching, letting the truth settle into place, while the celebration carried on around me, unaware of the cold that had just entered the room. I took the phone out of my pocket and checked the time, not because I needed it, but because it gave my hand something to do. The room felt smaller now, not crowded, controlled, like everyone had agreed on the same version of reality, and I was the only one reading a different script. Sloane drifted back to me with Grant in tow. He rested a hand on her lower back like a claim marker. She leaned into him, eyes bright, enjoying the attention. "You're being quiet," she said. "That's new." "I'm thinking," I replied. She laughed. "Careful, you'll strain something." Grant smiled, the polite kind people use when they don't intend to get involved. "Cassidy Wright, Sloane's told me so much about you." "I'm sure she has," I said. Sloane tilted her head. "You look like you want to say something. Go on." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't glance around for an audience. "Where's the watch?" Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker. She reached into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen with deliberate slowness. Then she turned it toward me. "A receipt. Private sale. Verified buyer. Wire transfer confirmed. $90,000. There," she said. "Problem solved." For a second, I wondered if this was some kind of test. If she expected me to react, yell, beg, 'cause a scene she could later rewrite as proof that I was unstable. When I didn't do any of that, she looked almost disappointed. "You sold it," I said. "Yes," she replied. "I did. That wasn't yours to sell." She waved her hand. "Please. Grandpa didn't put it in the will. You just assumed it was yours because you were his favorite little tomboy." Grant shifted his weight. "Sloane, maybe?" "It's fine," she cut in. "She needs to hear this." My parents were suddenly there, like they'd been waiting for the moment. My mother's lips were tight. My father looked annoyed, not surprised. "Cassidy," my mother said, "this is not the time." "When is the time?" I asked. My father sighed. "It's an object. It was converted into cash. End of story." I looked at him. "You knew." He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Sloane stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You wouldn't even know what to do with that kind of money. You live out of a suitcase. You drive that thing outside. At least I used it for something useful." She gestured toward the garage doors through the glass wall. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you." She didn't wait for me to agree. The garage lights came on automatically, revealing polished concrete and cars spaced just far enough apart to avoid touching egos. In the center sat a Tesla Model S plaid midnight blue, still wearing temporary plates. Sloane spread her arms like she'd built it herself. "Isn't she beautiful?" Grant nodded proudly. 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. Sloane beamed. "A necessary upgrade. Image matters." I stared at the car. "You sold Grandpa's watch to buy this. And a few other things," she said lightly. "Weddings are expensive. So is marrying into the right family." I turned back toward the house. That watch wasn't just worth money. Oh my God, she said, rolling her eyes. Here it comes. It mattered to him, I said. Which should matter to you. She laughed again, louder this time. He was old, he was confused. You know that. My mother touched my arm. Cassidy, stop. You're upsetting her. I looked down at her hand and then back up. You're okay with this. She hesitated. Just a fraction. Sloane needs stability. She stole from her own grandfather. She made a decision, my father said firmly. And it's done. I nodded slowly. So that's it. Sloane's smile sharpened. Yes, that's it. I thought about correcting her. I thought about explaining why she was wrong. Instead, I asked a different question. Who bought it? Her eyes narrowed. Why do you care, curiosity? She shrugged. Some collector, not my problem anymore. Grant cleared his throat. Everything was handled legally. I met his gaze. Legally doesn't mean safely. He blinked. What's that supposed to mean? It means you don't always know what you're selling. Sloane laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. You're reaching. It's a watch. I let that sit. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just nodded once. Congratulations on the car, I said, and the engagement. I turned to leave the garage. Behind me, Sloane scoffed. See, no idea how money works. I walked back into the party. People were gathering for a toast. My father clinked a glass, ready to speak. My mother adjusted her necklace. Grant straightened his tie. I took a spot near the edge of the room, close enough to hear, far enough to leave if I needed to. My phone vibrated in my hand. Not a call, a message, one line, asset status. I didn't reply yet. My father raised his glass. Family, he said. Legacy. New beginnings. Applause followed on cue. I watched my sister bask in it, confident, careless, already spending money that wasn't really hers. I watched my parents smile for the cameras, convinced they'd smoothed everything over. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a slow breath. Not to calm down, to focus. Because Sloane was right about one thing. That watch was just an object. She just had no idea what it actually did. I closed the front door of my rental apartment with my foot and dropped my keys into the bowl by the sink. The place smelled like cheap detergent and stale coffee, which was fine. Nothing here pretended to be more than it was. I set my bag on the table and pulled out my laptop. Government issued. Scarred casing. Encrypted so tightly it annoyed people who weren't supposed to use it. I powered it on and waited for the familiar prompt. Biometric scan, passphrase, secondary confirmation, access granted. I didn't hesitate. Hesitation was how mistakes happened. The watch wasn't registered as a civilian asset. That alone told me my grandfather hadn't been careless. He never was. I opened a secure utility buried 3 layers deep and entered a sequence most officers would never see, let alone touch. Level 5 access. The screen refreshed. A quiet hum from the cooling fan filled the room. I initiated a passive signal activation, not a GPS ping that lit up satellites or triggered alarms. Passive meant it waited, listened, and whispered back, only when asked correctly. A dot appeared on the map, then stabilized. Found you, I said aloud, more to anchor the moment than to celebrate it. The location wasn't a museum or a collector's vault. It wasn't even a residence. It was a commercial structure in the city, flagged in another system I recognized for reasons that had nothing to do with antiques. That was when the second thought landed. The watch wasn't just metal and gears. It never had been. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a beat. My grandfather had been old, not stupid. He didn't carry anything without redundancy. If the watch was active, then it was tied to something else. I opened a different folder. Home security. Years ago, before my last deployment, I'd installed a private system in his house. Not the kind you bought at a store. Hardwired cameras, off-grid power backup data stored locally and mirrored remotely. He'd complained about the wires, then thanked me when I was done. I logged in. The footage loaded by date. I scrolled. There it was, 2 nights before the engagement party. The camera angle was wide, covering the collection room. The door opened without force. Sloane stepped inside, heels clicking against the floor she'd grown up walking on. She didn't look nervous. She looked practiced. Grant followed her. I watched without blinking. She went straight to the case. No hesitation, no checking the room. She opened it and lifted the watch like she'd done it before. Grant scanned the shelves. Don't forget the papers, he said. Sloane waved him off. Later, this is the big one. She turned the watch over, examining it. I can't believe he gave this to her. Grant snorted. Your grandfather had a thing for uniforms. She smiled. Too bad loyalty doesn't pay the bills. Grant moved to the desk and started pulling drawers open. Not randomly. He knew what he was looking for. Just grab anything with a seal, he said. We can sort it later. Sloane hesitated. Are you sure he didn't look up? I'm very sure. They worked quickly, efficiently. This wasn't impulse. It was rehearsal. At one point, Sloane held up a ceremonial sword still sheathed. What about this? Grant's eyes lit up. That'll fetch a lot, she laughed. Perfect. That should cover another month. Of interest, he asked. Your problem, she said, casual as ordering takeout. I paused the video. Another month. I pulled up financial records I'd already been authorized to see for unrelated reasons. Grant Sterling wasn't just careless with money, he was drowning in it. Offshore accounts, shell payments, cash advances from places that didn't advertise. Over $2 million in outstanding gambling debt. The watch money hadn't been a luxury, it had been a stopgap. I closed the video and saved a copy with a timestamp and checksum. Evidence mattered, emotion didn't. My phone rang. I answered without looking at the number. Talk. Still working weekends? Raphael asked. Only when family makes it necessary. He chuckled. You sound cheerful. Where are you? 5 blocks from a warehouse I shouldn't be near. I checked the map again. Same dot, same building. You ran the signal, he said. Yes, that wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. There was a pause. Background noise, metal clanging, a voice I didn't recognize. They cracked it open, Raphael said. Not clean, amateur work. Whoever they are, they didn't know what they had. Who bought it? I asked. Name came back flagged. Viktor Volkov. I exhaled slowly. Of course it did. Volkov wasn't a collector. He was a broker. He moved objects between people who didn't want their names attached to them. Article weapons, information, sometimes all three at once. CIDs involved. Raphael continued. They lit it up as soon as the casing was breached. Red bright. I stood and paced once across the room, then stopped. They didn't just sell a watch. No, he agreed. They sold access. I glanced at the paused video on my screen, my sister's face frozen mid-laugh. How bad Raphael didn't answer right away. Bad enough that this is no longer a family matter. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Understood. Cass, he said, voice dropping, you didn't cause this. I know, you sure? Yes, because causing something meant initiating it. Sloane had done that all on her own. I ended the call and returned to the laptop. I compiled the footage transaction records and signal data into a single encrypted file, labeled it clean, precise, boring. That was how serious things were supposed to look. I glanced at the time, past midnight. Somewhere my parents were probably still congratulating themselves on a smooth evening. Sloane was likely asleep, confident she'd handled me. I shut the laptop and slid it back into my bag. The watch dot pulsed faintly on the map before the screen went dark. It was still transmitting. So was everything else they'd taken. And now so was I. The knock came just after 8 sharp and deliberate, the kind that assumes you'll answer. I was already dressed. I opened the door to find my parents standing side by side, polished and tense, with a man in a tailored gray suit half a step behind them. Silver hair, thin smile, leather briefcase held like a prop. Cassidy, my mother said, eyes scanning past me into the apartment. We need to talk. The man stepped forward without waiting for an invitation. Silas Vance, he said, extending a hand. Family council. I didn't take it. You're early. We didn't want to catch you off guard, my father said, which was almost funny. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat at the small table like they owned it. Silas placed his briefcase down, carefully opened it, and slid a stack of papers forward. This won't take long, he said, if you're cooperative. I stayed standing. Start talking. Silas adjusted his glasses. Given recent concerns about your mental health, your family believes it's in everyone's best interest to formalize certain protections. My mother folded her hands. It's for you, sweetheart. I looked at the papers. Legal letterhead, dense paragraphs, familiar phrasing, power of attorney, I said. Medical and financial. Silas nodded. Temporary until a full evaluation can be completed. And if I don't sign, my father cleared his throat. Then we'll have to pursue other options, such as... My mother finally met my eyes. Involuntary treatment. There it was, clean, simple, planned. You're alleging I'm unfit, I said. Silas leaned back. Your service record includes multiple deployments. Exposure to combat stress. PTSD is well documented in cases like yours. Cases like mine, I repeated. It would be irresponsible to ignore it, my mother said softly. You've been distant, paranoid, fixated. I almost smiled, almost. Silas slid another document across the table. This is a voluntary relinquishment of any remaining claims to your grandfather's estate. Remaining, I said. Interesting word choice. My father's jaw tightened. We're trying to protect the family. By declaring me incompetent. By being realistic, my mother snapped, then caught herself. By being careful. I walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and took a slow sip. I needed them comfortable, confident. People talked more when they thought they were winning. You wrote this, I said, looking at my mother. She stiffened. What? The language, I said. The phrasing? This is yours. Silas smiled thinly. Your mother is very involved. Involved, I said. Or directing. Silas didn't answer. I set the glass down and reached into my pocket. Not for the phone. For the small recorder I'd turned on before opening the door. I placed it under the table with my foot and nudged it into position. Let me get this straight, I said. You want me to sign away my rights because I objected to my sister stealing classified property. Silas frowned. We're not discussing that. Why not? Because it's irrelevant. My father leaned forward. Cassidy, if you don't sign, we will say you're unstable. We will say you're a danger to yourself. Do you know how fast that moves once it's filed? I nodded. I do. Silas tapped the papers. This doesn't have to be ugly. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled it back. You're doing this for Sloane, I said. She hesitated. She's under a lot of pressure, and you're helping her by erasing me. Silas sighed, impatience slipping through. Let's not dramatize. There's compensation involved. I looked at him. Compensation. He glanced at my parents, then back at me. Your sister has agreed to a percentage distribution once certain assets are liquidated. My father snapped Silas. Too late. I tilted my head. Which assets? Silas closed his eyes briefly, then continued. The coastal property, the land parcel in Maine. Standard procedure. And your cut. Silas stiffened. Excuse me? You said distribution, I replied. Not inheritance. That implies a facilitator. My mother stood abruptly. Enough. Silas stood too defensive now. This is a generous offer. Sign and this all goes away. I walked back to the table and picked up the pen. Everyone relaxed just a fraction. My mother exhaled. My father straightened. Silas smiled. I didn't sign. I set the pen down. You're afraid, I said calmly. Not of me. Of what happens if I stay involved. Silas scoffed. This is your last chance to be reasonable. I leaned forward. Sloane promised you a percentage if I was removed. Silas's mouth opened, then closed. The room went very quiet. My mother's face drained of color. Silas. He recovered quickly, but not fast enough. That's not... You said it, I continued. Not in those words. But you said it. My father stared at him. Is that true? Silas adjusted his tie. We had an understanding. My mother took a step back like she'd been slapped. You told me this was about protecting the family. It is, Silas said. From litigation. I reached under the table and retrieved the recorder, holding it up where everyone could see it. Silas froze. My mother's voice was barely audible. Cassidy put that away. No, I said. I think I'll keep it. My father looked between us, anger finally replacing annoyance. What have you done? I met his gaze, listened. Silas's composure cracked. You can't use that. I can, I replied. And I will. My mother sank back into her chair, hands trembling. You're tearing this family apart. I shook my head. I'm not the one who tried to lock me away. Silas grabbed his briefcase. This conversation is over. Yes, I said. It is. They left in silence. No apologies, no explanations. Just the sound of expensive shoes on cheap flooring. I locked the door behind them and leaned against it for a moment. Not to recover, to decide. The recorder felt solid in my hand. So did the phone in my pocket, vibrating once with a new message from a secure number. Status update required. I straightened, walked back to the table, and sat down. I sat at the table and typed one word back. Proceed. The response came almost immediately, followed by a secure call request. I accepted and put it on speaker. You escalated this fast, Raphael said. I didn't, I replied. They did. A pause. Paper rustling. Someone else breathing on the line. CID agrees, he said. Volkov isn't just a name in a ledger. He's been circling this kind of hardware for years. Hardware, I repeated. Yes, Raphael said. Not jewelry. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the location feed. The dot had shifted slightly, still inside the same building. He's not alone. No, Raphael said. And neither are you. He gave me the address of a cafe that pretended to be charming while serving terrible coffee. Neutral ground. Public enough to discourage stupidity. I grabbed my jacket and left. Volkov didn't show up, not directly. Brokers like him rarely did. Instead, I got a woman with perfect posture and a man who watched reflections instead of faces. They sat before I did. "You're Cassidy Miller," the woman said. No question. Yes, she slid a business card across the table. It had a name and a number. Nothing else. "We represent interests who recently acquired an item connected to you." "Connected," I said. "Or stolen." She smiled politely. "Purchased." "With stolen funds," I replied. "By someone who didn't own it." The man spoke for the first time. "You're making this emotional." I leaned back. "You're making it criminal." The woman folded her hands. "The item has been disassembled." I didn't react, not outwardly. "Disassembled," I said. "When?" "Last night," she replied. "We were unaware of its secondary properties." "That's convenient," I said. "Unfortunate," she corrected. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "You triggered a containment alert tied to U.S. military redundancies." The man's jaw tightened. "Just a little." "You sold access keys," I continued. "Not just to buildings, to systems." The woman's smile thinned. "Our client has no interest in conflict." "Too late," I said. "You already started one." She took a breath. "What do you want?" "The item returned," I said. "Intact. Every component, every fragment." "That may not be possible." "Then you should prepare for consequences." The man laughed softly. "You're threatening us." I shook my head. "I'm informing you." The woman studied me for a long moment. "You're not law enforcement." "No," I agreed. "I'm worse." I stood, leaving my coffee untouched. "You have one chance to mitigate damage. And if we don't, you'll be explaining to people who don't negotiate." I walked out without waiting for an answer. By the time I got back to my apartment, the alert status had changed. The system didn't use colors, it used priority codes. This one was high. My phone rang again. "This just crossed desks, it shouldn't have," Raphael said. "Defense is involved now, so is counterintelligence." "CID," I asked. "Leading," he confirmed. "MP is standing by." I closed my eyes for a second, not out of fear, out of acceptance. "This isn't internal anymore," I said. "No," Raphael replied. "It's national." I thought of Sloan smiling in that garage. Thought of my parents signing papers they pretended not to understand. Thought of Grant digging through drawers like he owned the place. "They don't know what they did," I said. Raphael's voice was steady. "Ignorance won't help them." I opened the file with Silas's recorded confession and added it to the packet. Then the footage. Then the transaction logs. Clean chain, no commentary. "Where's the watch now?" I asked. "Parts are moving," Raphael said. "Too late to stop the initial breach. But enough remains to trace intent." "Good. You're sure you want to be named?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm not hiding." A knock hit my door. 2 quick taps. Controlled. I opened it to find Raphael himself. Jacket zipped badge tucked away, eyes sharp. "We're locking this down," he said. "Once it moves, it doesn't slow." I stepped aside. "Then don't miss." He entered and glanced at the screen. "That's everything. For now." He nodded. "Volkov's people panicked. That usually means mistakes. People panic when money doesn't work," I said. "Or when power slips." Raphael checked his watch. "There's something else." I waited. "Your sister's name is already in the system," he said. "So is her fiancé's." I didn't flinch. "They earned it." "They'll say they didn't know." "They didn't ask," I replied. "That's the difference." Raphael paused. "Once this goes public, it won't stay neat." "I'm aware." He studied me. "You okay?" "I'm focused," I said. "That's enough." He nodded and headed for the door. "We'll be in touch." After he left, I stood alone in the apartment and listened to the quiet. No music, no television, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I checked my phone one last time. A message from Sloan. "You really embarrassed me tonight." I stared at it for a moment, then locked the screen. Outside, somewhere in the city, people were scrambling to fix a problem they'd created. Inside a system they couldn't control, with consequences they hadn't priced in. I put the phone down and went back to work. I read Sloan's message twice, then set the phone face down on the table. Embarrassment was her word for consequences. It always had been. I pulled Grant Sterling's financial profile back up and started from the beginning, not because I needed the overview, but because patterns mattered. The numbers didn't lie. They just waited. $2.3 million in gambling losses over 18 months. Not casinos with neon signs and cocktail servers. Private rooms, back rooms. Credit extended at interest rates that turned panic into profit. The kind of debt that didn't get forgiven and didn't get forgotten. The watch money hadn't even dented it. I followed the transfers. Wire to wire, account to account. Most of the $90,000 went straight into a hole with no bottom. The rest disappeared into short-term loans with names designed to sound friendly. They weren't. My laptop chimed softly as another dataset finished syncing. Phone metadata, texts, location pings. Grant wasn't hiding anymore. People stopped hiding when they ran out of options. I opened the message thread between him and Sloan. She'd known. Not everything, but enough. You promised this would cover us. I said it would buy time. They're calling again, then we need more. I scrolled. What about the house your parents would never sell? They will if they think it's temporary. I stopped there. The house wasn't just real estate. It was my grandfather's anchor. The place he'd kept when everything else changed. He'd refused to sell it even when developers waved checks at him. Said some things were meant to stay put. Sloan and Grant were planning to cash it out and vanish. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a second. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. The phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. Miller. Cassidy, my mother said. Her voice was tight, controlled. We need to meet. No, I replied. Please, she said. This has gone too far. I thought of Silas's voice on the recorder, of the word distribution. You crossed that line yesterday. She inhaled sharply. Sloan is under extreme stress. So are the people she's sold to, I said. And they don't take deep breaths and calm down. She's your sister. She's an adult. My mother's voice dropped. Grant made mistakes. So did she, I said. And she kept going. A pause. You're enjoying this? No, I replied. I'm finishing it. I ended the call. Another message came through, this one from Sloan. Tomorrow is my wedding. If you show up, I will call the police and tell them you attacked me. I stared at the screen. Threats were interesting. They revealed what someone thought they still controlled. I opened the case file and added the message. Time-stamped, verified. Then I pulled up the video again. The one from my grandfather's house. Sloan lifting the watch. Grant digging through drawers, their voices clear, calm. Evidence didn't care about weddings. I received a secure ping from Raphael. They're scrambling, he said. Volkov's people tried to move what's left. Too late. Any word on Grant, I asked. Flagged, he replied. High-risk financial exposure. He's been borrowing from the wrong side of town. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. They're planning to sell the house. Raphael was quiet for a moment. That would complicate things. Not for long, I said. I closed the laptop and stood. The apartment felt smaller again, but this time it wasn't pressure. It was momentum. I pulled out a slim folder from my bag. Inside were copies of documents my grandfather had insisted I keep years ago. He'd called them insurance, said the word with a smile that meant he expected trouble from people who shared his last name. One of them was a conditional transfer of authority, not public, not advertised. Triggered only if certain criteria were met. Breach of trust, misappropriation of assets, attempted coercion of an heir, all boxes checked. I sent a single message through a secure channel. Proceed to full disclosure. The response came back a moment later. Acknowledged. I checked the time. Late afternoon. Rehearsal dinner would be starting soon. Toasts, speeches, carefully staged happiness. Sloan would be busy, distracted, confident. I packed the laptop and the folder, then paused and looked around the apartment. Nothing here mattered. It was temporary by design. I picked up my phone and typed one message back to Sloan. I won't touch you. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. As I stepped outside, the air felt sharper, colder, honest. I walked to my car and got in, setting the folder on the passenger seat like a reminder. The drive took me past the coastline, past houses that looked like promises and functioned like leverage. I thought about how many people confuse love with loyalty and loyalty with silence. They're not the same. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. Raphael. CID is ready, he said. Once this opens, it opens everywhere. Good, I replied. You sure about the timing? I didn't pick it, I said. They did. I ended the call and pulled forward as the light changed. Somewhere ahead, my sister was practicing her smile. My parents were rehearsing explanations. Grant was probably calculating odds like he always did. None of them were looking at the numbers that actually mattered. I was. I took a seat in the last pew and crossed my legs, careful not to let the hem of my black dress touch the polished floor. The church smelled like old wood and expensive flowers, the kind of place designed to make people feel forgiven before they asked for it. I hadn't worn a uniform. That would have made it about me. I hadn't worn anything bright either. This wasn't a celebration, it was a viewing. Heads turned when I walked in. Not many, just enough. People recognized faces like mine from news segments and donor dinners. They couldn't place me, which made them uneasy. Sloan stood at the altar, radiant and perfectly rehearsed. The dress fit her like it had been tailored to hide consequences. Grant stood beside her, shoulders back, jaw tight, eyes darting the way they always did when he was counting exits. My parents sat in this front row. My mother dabbed her eyes, playing the role she'd practiced for weeks. My father stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if posture alone could hold the day together. An usher leaned down and whispered something to Sloan. Her head turned slightly, our eyes met. Her smile faltered for half a second. Then it came back sharper. She leaned toward Grant and whispered. He glanced over his shoulder, spotted me, and froze. Not fear, recognition. He knew what it meant when someone stopped bluffing. Sloane lifted her chin and gave a subtle nod to the security guard near the aisle. He shifted his weight and started toward me. I didn't move. The priest cleared his throat and began. Words about love, commitment, sacrifice. I listened with the same attention I gave weather reports in hostile territory. The guard stopped 2 rows away. Ma'am, he whispered, you're not on the list. I'm family, I replied quietly. He hesitated. The bride asked that, she can ask, I said. You can decide. He looked toward the altar. Sloane's eyes were locked on us now, fury barely contained beneath makeup and pearls. The guard stepped back. The ceremony continued. I watched Sloane recite her vows without blinking. She talked about trust with conviction, about honesty with warmth. Grant followed, voice steady, hands shaking just enough to notice if you knew where to look. My phone rested in my lap screen, dark. Everything that needed to be ready already was. The priest reached the familiar line. The one people pretend is symbolic. If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now. The room went still. Even the air felt like it paused. I stood, not fast, not slow, just enough movement to make sure everyone saw it happen. A murmur rippled through the pews. My mother twisted around in her seat, eyes wide. My father half rose, then sat back down like gravity had finally found him. Sloane's face drained of color. Sit down, she hissed, forgetting the microphone clipped to her dress. I didn't respond. I walked up the aisle, heels echoing against stone. Each step was measured, practiced. I stopped a few feet from the altar and turned to face the guests. I won't take long, I said, my voice carried without effort. Years of briefings had taught me where sound traveled. The priest looked confused. Miss, this is highly inappropriate, I know, I said. So is selling classified property to foreign intermediaries. Gasps broke out like static. Grant stepped forward. You don't know what you're talking about. I turned slightly and met his eyes. $2.3 million, I said. That's what you owe, give or take interest. He flinched. Sloane laughed sharp and brittle. This is a joke, she's unstable. I reached into my bag and pulled out the iPad. I handed it to the technician running the projector. He looked at it, then at me. Plug it in, I said. He hesitated, glanced at the altar, then did it. The screen behind Sloane flickered. The first image appeared. A receipt, clean, clear, private sale, $90,000. Sloane screamed, "Turn that off!" The technician froze. The next image replaced it. Video footage. My grandfather's collection room. Sloane's voice filled the church. He was old, he won't notice. The room erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. Phones came out. People leaned forward like they were watching something they'd paid for. Grant lunged toward me. I didn't move. He stopped short, inches away when he saw my expression. Not anger. Assessment. Security stepped in, then hands on his chest, pulling him back. He struggled, then stopped. Sweat beaded at his hairline. My father stood. This is a private family matter. I turned and looked at him. You tried to have me declared incompetent. Silence slammed down hard. My mother sank back into her seat. Sloane shook her head violently. It was a gift. He gave it to me. The next clip played. Her voice again, clearer this time. Just sell the sword next. That should cover another month. Grant's name followed, tied to a transaction log. The priest stepped away from the altar, pale. I'm calling this off. Sloane screamed, raw and unfiltered. You can't do this. I stepped back and faced the crowd. I didn't. They did. Sirens cut through the noise outside, distant at first, then closer. Blue and red light flashed through stained glass, painting the walls in colors no one had planned for. The church doors shook once, then opened. Heavy boots hit stone in perfect rhythm. 12 military police officers moved in, weapons down, but ready. Behind them, federal agents spread out badges, visible expressions blank. The room exploded into chaos. People stood, shouted, scrambled for exits that were suddenly blocked. Cameras flashed. Someone dropped a glass that shattered loud enough to cut through everything. The MP commander stepped forward. Gray hair, calm eyes. He didn't look at the altar. He walked straight to me. He stopped, stood tall, and saluted. Colonel Miller, he said. We have secured the assets and locked down the site per CID directive. Sloane let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream. No, 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 the commander turned to her and Grant. Sloan Miller, Grant Sterling, you are under arrest. Grant's knees buckled. Sloan thrashed as cuffs closed around her wrists, white satin tearing under pressure. This is insane. She's lying. The commander's voice didn't change. You sold strategic U.S. military property to a foreign broker. He nodded to an agent who read the charge without emotion. Treason. The word echoed longer than anything else had that day. I stepped back as they led her away, veil slipping, mascara streaking, eyes wild. The guests stood frozen, their perfect afternoon dismantled piece by piece. I stayed where I was, watching it all move exactly as it needed to. The first thing that disappeared was the music. The organ cut off mid-note, leaving a hollow silence that made every breath sound loud. The second thing was the illusion that this was still a wedding. Uniforms had a way of doing that. They stripped context down to facts. The MP team split cleanly. 2 secured the doors. 4 moved to the aisle. The rest formed a perimeter without anyone having to say a word. Discipline didn't need narration. Federal agents followed, slower, scanning faces already matching names to data. Guests backed away, instinctively clutching purses, straightening jackets, suddenly very aware of where they were standing. Grant tried to speak. Nothing came out. An agent took him by the arm and guided him forward. He didn't resist. He looked relieved, like the math had finally stopped running in his head. Sloan did the opposite. She fought the cuffs, screaming words that collided with each other. This is harassment. My fiancé's father is a senator. You can't. A female MP tightened her grip. Watch your step. I didn't do anything, Sloan shouted, voice breaking. It was just a watch. The commander turned slightly enough to acknowledge her without engaging. Ma'am, the value of the object is not the issue. An agent stepped beside him and read from a tablet. Calm, flat, final, unauthorized sale of controlled military hardware. Conspiracy to transfer classified materials. Financial facilitation of foreign intelligence access. Each line landed heavier than the last. Sloane's face changed as the words stacked up. Confusion gave way to fear. Fear turned into disbelief. She twisted her head toward my parents. Mom, Dad, tell them. My mother stood frozen, hands clasped in front of her lips, moving without sound. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him, smaller. An agent approached them next. Richard Miller, Diane Miller. We'll need you to remain here for questioning. My father bristled. On what grounds? The agent didn't blink. Obstruction, complicity, attempted coercion of a federal officer. My mother swayed. A chair scraped as someone behind her pulled it back before she fell. The guests watched in silence now. No phones, no whispers. Shock had a way of shutting people up. I stayed where I was. The commander finally turned back to me. CID has confirmed the breach. The remaining components have been recovered. Where? I asked. Warehouse on Canal Street, he replied. Sub-level, poorly shielded. Any data loss? Attempted, he said. Unsuccessful. I nodded. Thank you. He lowered his voice. Your grandfather planned well. Yes, I said. He did. Sloan was dragged past me, heels scraping uselessly against stone. Her dress was torn now, lace caught on the edge of a pew. Mascara streaked down her face in uneven lines. She locked eyes with me. You did this, she hissed. I met her gaze. You did. She laughed, sharp and hysterical. You think you won, they'll ruin you too. I didn't answer. She was pulled away, still shouting, still reaching for control she no longer had. Grant followed, head down, jaw slack. He didn't look at anyone, not even me. Once they were gone, the room sagged, like a structure that had been standing on tension alone. The priest stood near the altar, hands shaking. I don't know what to say. No one does, I replied. An agent approached me with a clipboard. Colonel Miller will need your statement. You'll have it, I said. Everything is documented. He nodded. We're aware. Outside, the sirens died down, replaced by the low hum of engines and radios. News vans were already lining the street. Someone always tipped them off. Sometimes justice did. I turned toward my parents. My mother looked at me like she didn't recognize my face. How could you do this to us? I answered without raising my voice. You tried to have me committed. That was different, she said weakly. We were trying to protect. You were trying to control, I said. There's a difference. My father stepped forward. Cassidy, listen to me. We can fix this. I shook my head. No, you can't. An agent cleared his throat. Sir, please remain where you are. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat down. The commander gave me a final nod. We'll be in touch. I watched them move through the church one last time, methodical, efficient, leaving nothing to chance. When they were gone, the space felt too big. People started to move again, quietly, carefully. No one looked at me directly now. They didn't know where to place me in the story they'd just witnessed. I walked down the aisle alone, past fallen programs and a bouquet crushed under a pew. At the doors, I paused and looked back once. The altar stood empty. Outside, the air was cool and clean. The ocean was visible between buildings, indifferent to all of it. Raphael waited near an unmarked car. He handed me a bottle of water. "You held steady." "So did they," I said. He glanced toward the church. "This is going to get loud." "I know. Your family, I know," I repeated. He studied me for a moment. "You okay?" I took a sip of water. "I'm clear." He nodded. "That counts." We stood there as agents moved in and out, as reporters shouted questions that went unanswered, as a day meant for celebration dissolved into record. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Assets secured. Estate clause initiated." I locked the screen and put the phone away. Inside the church, people were still trying to understand what had happened. I already did. I didn't go back inside the church. There was nothing there that belonged to me anymore. I walked down the steps past microphones and flashing lights and got into the car without answering a single question. Silence wasn't avoidance. It was accuracy. The drive took me north away from the city and toward the house my grandfather refused to sell, the one everyone else treated like an asset. I pulled into the gravel driveway just after dusk. The lights were off. The place looked smaller without people trying to extract value from it. I let myself in. The house smelled like dust and oil and old books. Honest smells. I set my bag down and walked through each room, not checking for anything, just acknowledging that it was still here. Walls, floors, space that didn't ask for anything. My phone rang once, then again. I ignored it and went straight to the study. The sword was gone from the wall. The case where the watch had sat was empty, but the desk was exactly how he'd left it. Same scratches, same chair pushed in just slightly crooked. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the folder Harold Jennings had told me about years ago. The real will, not the polished version that got read aloud in front of people who only heard what they wanted. This one was different. It didn't list items, it listed conditions. If Cassidy is removed by coercion, authority transfers immediately. If assets are misappropriated, control consolidates. If my name is used to justify dishonor, the truth is released in full. No poetry, no sentiment, just contingency. A knock came at the door. Harold Jennings stepped inside a moment later, older than I remembered, but sharper too. He didn't waste time on condolences. "It's done," he said. "The clause executed automatically." "I know," I replied. He nodded. "The house is yours, all remaining property. Accounts are frozen pending investigation. You're the sole administrator now. And my parents," he hesitated. "They've retained counsel." "That figures." He closed the folder and looked at me carefully. "Arthur trusted you." "I know." "He didn't leave letters," Harold continued. "Except one." He handed me a sealed envelope. I waited until he left before opening it. "Cassidy, if you're reading this, it means someone decided that blood was permission. I never believed that. Family is a duty only when it's mutual. They'll tell you this was about money. It wasn't. Money just makes weak intentions louder. The watch was never the point. It was bait. Not for thieves, for truth. If you're standing here, then you stood your ground. That matters more than anything I could have left you. Don't carry this longer than you have to. Justice is heavy. Put it down when the work is done." "Grandpa," I folded the letter and sat back in the chair. Outside, engines started, one by one. The last MP vehicle pulled away from the end of the drive, taillights disappearing into the trees. Quiet settled in, the kind that didn't demand attention. I stood and went back to the collection room. A temporary case sat on the table, official seals, documentation attached. I broke the seal and opened it. The watch was there, scratched, opened, reassembled, still intact. I didn't put it on, not yet. I closed the case and slid it back into the drawer where my grandfather had kept things that weren't for display. The phone finally stopped buzzing. I checked the messages. Reporters, unknown numbers, a single text from my mother that said, "We never meant for it to go this far." I deleted it. Another from a blocked number, probably Sloan. I didn't open it. Some apologies arrived late because they were never meant to arrive at all. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window, looking out over the dark lawn. No spotlight, no crowd, just space. In the military, we're trained to protect systems, borders, protocols. People will never meet, but nobody teaches you how to protect your own history, when the threat shares your last name. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. The truth had moved where it needed to go. Consequences had found their addresses. And what remained wasn't rage or regret. It was clarity. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would bring paperwork statements, long conversations with people who needed closure. That could wait. For now, the house was quiet. The legacy intact. And the line between loyalty and self-respect finally clear. So here's the real question for you. When protecting your family means confronting them, where do you draw the line, and would you have the courage to hold it when everything familiar tells you not to? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories about accountability, boundaries, and real consequences matter to you, consider subscribing for more. I used to think betrayal had a sound, a slammed door, a raised voice, something dramatic enough that you could point at it and say, "That was the moment everything broke." I was wrong. Real betrayal in families is usually quiet. It comes wrapped in normal conversations, polite smiles, and phrases you've heard your entire life. Things like, "Don't make this a big deal," or "You know how she is," or the most dangerous one, "We're family." When my sister sold something that didn't belong to her, the problem wasn't the sale. The problem was how many people around her decided it was acceptable. How quickly the room adjusted to protect her comfort instead of the truth. That's when I learned something most people don't want to admit. Betrayal rarely starts with cruelty. It starts with entitlement. People convince themselves they deserve what you have because they believe your strength means you won't miss it. Your silence means permission. Your independence means you don't need protection. If you've ever been the reliable one, the capable one, the one who can handle it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Families like to tell stories about themselves. And when you don't fit the story they want to tell the world, they don't change the story. They change how they see you. That's why the warning signs are subtle. It starts when they joke at your expense in front of others and call it humor. When your accomplishments are minimized because they don't match the image the family sells. When you're asked to stay quiet so things look smooth from the outside. You feel something's off, but you tell yourself you're being sensitive. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to disrupt the peace. Here's the truth most people learn too late: peace that requires your silence isn't peace. It's control. One of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting for betrayal to look obvious. Waiting for it to feel undeniable. By the time it does, the damage is already done. Real betrayal shows up as patterns, not explosions. Patterns like, you're always asked to compromise, but no one meets you halfway. Your boundaries are treated like inconveniences. When something goes wrong, the solution is always for you to let it go. And when you finally speak up, the focus shifts immediately from what happened to how you reacted. That's not an accident. That's deflection. Families that rely on image don't fear wrongdoing. They fear exposure. And the moment you stop playing along, you become the problem. Here's something else people don't say out loud. The strongest person in the family is often the easiest to betray. Because everyone assumes you'll absorb the impact, that you'll recover, that you won't walk away. Strength becomes a liability when others use it as an excuse to treat you unfairly. I wasn't betrayed because I was weak. I was betrayed because they thought I was strong enough to tolerate it. Once you understand that, the guilt starts to lose its grip. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "Why am I expected to carry this?" Another hard truth: family betrayal doesn't always come from hatred. Sometimes it comes from fear. Fear that you won't need them. Fear that you see through them. Fear that your integrity exposes their shortcuts. When people feel threatened, they don't always attack directly. Sometimes they undermine, they label, they try to discredit your judgment so they don't have to confront their own behavior. That's why accusations like, "You're overreacting" or "You've changed" show up right when you start holding your ground. Those words aren't observations, they're warnings. They mean the old rules no longer work on you. So how do you recognize betrayal without losing yourself in anger or self-doubt? You ask better questions. Not, "Why would they do this to me?" But, "If this were anyone else, would I accept this behavior?" Not, "Am I being too harsh?" but, "What standard am I being asked to abandon?" You also learn when to stop explaining. Explanation feels productive. But in toxic family dynamics, it's often just fuel. People who benefit from misunderstanding you have no incentive to understand you better. Clarity doesn't come from saying more. It comes from saying less and standing firmer. That doesn't mean becoming cold or cruel. It means recognizing that protecting yourself isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of self-respect. You don't owe access to people who misuse it. You don't owe trust to people who exploit it. And you don't owe silence to people who depend on it. Betrayal doesn't define you, but how you respond to it shapes the rest of your life. You can spend years trying to earn fairness from people who profit from denying it. Or you can accept what their behavior already told you and act accordingly. That choice isn't easy, it's lonely, and it often comes with consequences. But here's what I've learned: losing the approval of people who require your self-betrayal is not loss, it's relief. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, pay attention to that. Your instincts don't need permission. The moment you stop pretending everything is fine is the moment you give yourself a chance to be. For a long time, I thought boundaries were something you set after things went wrong, like a consequence, like a punishment, something you used when you were angry or done with people. That belief almost ruined me, because when you see boundaries as punishment, you hesitate to use them. You wait until you're exhausted. You negotiate them. You explain them. And by the time you finally draw the line, you're already bleeding. Here's what I learned the hard way: boundaries aren't punishment. They're maintenance. They're not about controlling other people. They're about controlling what you allow into your life. Most people raised in complicated families don't struggle with knowing where their boundaries are. They struggle with believing they're allowed to enforce them, especially when the people crossing the line share your last name. Families love to blur the definition of love. They mix it with obligation, guilt, and history. They teach you that saying no is selfish, that distance is cruelty, that compliance is maturity. That's not love, that's conditioning. Real boundaries don't sound dramatic. They sound boring, almost disappointing. I'm not comfortable with that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not discussing this. No insults, no explanations, no performance. And that's exactly why people who rely on your compliance hate boundaries. They can't argue with something that doesn't engage. When I finally stopped explaining myself, people accused me of changing. They weren't wrong. What they meant was that I stopped being available for manipulation. Here's something important to understand: when you set a boundary, the reaction you get tells you everything you need to know about the relationship. Healthy people may feel disappointed, but they adjust. Unhealthy people escalate. They guilt trip, they gaslight, they rewrite history, they attack your character. Not because your boundary is unreasonable, but because it threatens the role they assigned you. If your role was the fixer, your boundary feels like abandonment. If your role was the buffer, your boundary feels like betrayal. If your role was the quiet one, your boundary feels like rebellion. That's why boundaries often trigger emotional overreactions. They expose systems that only worked when one person absorbed the cost. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. If your boundary causes a relationship to collapse, the relationship was already broken. You just stopped holding it together by yourself. Setting boundaries doesn't make you heartless. It makes you honest. And honesty feels aggressive to people who depend on your silence. Another mistake people make is thinking boundaries need consensus. They don't. You don't need agreement to protect yourself. You don't need permission to disengage. And you don't need to convince anyone that your reasons are valid. Your comfort is not a group decision. One of the hardest boundaries to accept is emotional distance. Not yelling, not cutting someone off dramatically, just stepping back, limiting access, letting conversations end sooner, sharing less. For families used to unlimited access to you, that feels like punishment. But it's not, it's calibration. You're adjusting the relationship to a level that doesn't cost you your mental health. Temporary distance isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's the only way to see clearly. And permanent distance, that's not failure either. Some relationships don't survive boundaries because they were built on boundary violations. That doesn't mean you didn't try hard enough. It means the relationship required you to keep losing for it to exist. Here's a rule I live by now: if someone only feels close to you when you're uncomfortable, that closeness isn't safe. Boundaries also don't need to be loud. You don't have to announce them. You don't have to justify them. You just enforce them consistently. Consistency is what makes boundaries real. Not ultimatums, not speeches. Consistency. Say no once, then say it again, then stop responding when the pressure starts. Silence used intentionally is not avoidance. It's refusal to participate in dysfunction. People often ask, but what if they never change? That question misses the point. Boundaries aren't about changing them. They're about protecting you regardless of what they do. If someone grows because of your boundary, that's a bonus, not the goal. The goal is to stop sacrificing your peace to keep others comfortable. I used to believe that love meant enduring, that loyalty meant staying, that forgiveness meant access. I don't believe that anymore. Love can exist without proximity. Loyalty can exist without obedience. Forgiveness can exist without reconciliation. You're allowed to care about people you no longer trust with your inner life. You're allowed to step back without hating anyone. And you're allowed to build a life that doesn't revolve around managing other people's reactions. Boundaries don't make you cold. They make you safe. And once you experience what safety feels like, you stop mistaking chaos for connection. If you're struggling with guilt right now, ask yourself this one question. If someone I loved were in my position, would I tell them to keep tolerating this, or would I tell them to protect themselves? Your answer already knows what to do. You just have to let it lead. For a long time, I thought justice would feel loud. I imagined relief that came with a rush, closure that felt like triumph, a moment where everything finally made sense and the pain balanced itself out. That's not what happened. Real justice is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for witnesses. It shows up when you stop needing to prove anything. Most people confuse justice with revenge because both involve consequences, but they come from very different places. Revenge is emotional. It needs validation. It wants the other person to feel what you felt. Justice is procedural. It's rooted in truth, boundaries, and follow-through. It doesn't care how anyone feels about it. That distinction matters because one keeps you tied to the harm and the other lets you leave it behind. Revenge keeps the story alive. Justice lets it end. I didn't feel victorious when everything collapsed. I felt finished. That's how I knew it was justice. When you're driven by revenge, the other person still has power over you. Your mood depends on their reaction. Your peace depends on their suffering. Your attention stays locked on them. That's not freedom. That's captivity with better excuses. Justice is different. It doesn't require you to watch. It doesn't require you to celebrate. It simply restores balance and moves on. One of the hardest things to accept is that justice rarely looks like apology. People who do real damage almost never give satisfying apologies. If they were capable of accountability, they wouldn't have crossed the line in the first place. Waiting for remorse is one of the most common ways people stay stuck. Closure doesn't come from hearing the right words. It comes from knowing the truth and acting on it. Once you stop expecting people to understand why they hurt you, you free yourself from their limitations. Another uncomfortable truth: sometimes justice looks harsh from the outside. People will say you went too far, that you should have handled it privately. That family matters shouldn't be aired. Those opinions usually come from people who didn't pay the price of staying quiet. Justice doesn't need to be gentle to be fair. It needs to be accurate. And accuracy doesn't negotiate with comfort. I didn't expose anyone out of anger. I didn't escalate to make a point. I followed the process because that's what protects everyone, especially the people who come after you. That's another part people miss. Justice isn't just about what happens now. It's about what becomes possible later. When you allow harm to be minimized or hidden, you teach others that consequences are optional. When you tell the truth and let systems do their job, you interrupt that pattern. You make it harder for the next person to be exploited. Walking away without regret doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means your feelings no longer run the show. I still felt sadness, disappointment, a sense of loss for the family I thought I had. But I didn't feel doubt, and that's the difference. Doubt is what keeps people replaying conversations at 3 a.m. Doubt is what turns boundaries into internal arguments. Doubt is what convinces you to reopen doors that should stay closed. Justice removes doubt. It gives you something solid to stand on when emotions try to pull you backward. Another thing I learned: peace doesn't come from tying up every loose end. Some people will never understand your choices. Some will rewrite the story to protect themselves. Some will blame you because accountability is uncomfortable. You don't need to correct all of that. You don't need to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. Peace comes when you stop managing other people's narratives and focus on your own alignment. Alignment is knowing your actions match your values. That's it. Not perfection, not approval. Alignment. That's the real inheritance. Money gets spent, property changes hands, reputations rise and fall, but how you respond when things fall apart, that stays with you. When you choose justice over revenge, you choose a future that isn't built around your worst moment. You stop dragging the past into every decision. You stop measuring your worth by who hurt you. You stop asking whether they got what they deserved and start asking whether you're living the life you want. That shift is subtle, but it's everything. The moment you realize you don't need their downfall to feel whole is the moment you actually win. Not because they lost, but because you're no longer playing. If you're standing at a crossroads right now deciding whether to expose the truth, walk away quietly, or or keep swallowing something that's eating at you? Here's the question that matters most. When this is over, however it ends, will you be able to live with the version of yourself that made the choice, not the version they approve of? Not the version that keeps the peace, the version you respect when no one is watching. That answer doesn't shout, it's calm, it's steady, and it doesn't rush you. Listen to it. That's where justice actually lives.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction created by artificial intelligence to heighten drama and emotion. But the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs. 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 Better suits